Siblings and sisters and brothers in Christ, welcome to Tuesdays for Nurture. This is a webinar series where we faithfully focus on education for the people of God. So we have all sorts of things that you may need for you and your church in this day and age, from faith-filled politics to interviews of key leaders to how-tos in congregational life and the impacts of current realities on the life of the church going forward. And every webinar will have clear suggestions about what you can do to change the church and the world towards the world God imagines for all of us. I am your host, Reverend Dr. Chris Davies, and I am so excited to be joined today by Reverend Dr. Patrick Duggan from CB&LF and Reverend Susan Mitchell, and they are here with us, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves in the context of their work before we go into what will be a conversation for all of us to learn from. So welcome, Patrick.
Okay, I was having trouble unmuting. Well, thank you, Reverend Dr. Chris Davies, and it's a pleasure to be with you on this Tuesdays for Nurture. And glad to, anytime we can spend some time together, and always happy to talk about the great work of Church Building and Loan Fund. Should I say more?
We'll get lots of time.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Reverend Dr. Chris Davies, for this invitation. It's great to be here and be able to share. Susan Mitchell, I'm the Associate Director for Strategic Initiatives for Church Building and Loan Fund. And in a couple of days, I'll be celebrating my 11th year with the United Church of Christ. Woohoo! It's always exciting to be able to showcase what we do, and we do so much.
That is the truth. I also know that, well, why don't we back up and start from the very beginning? For somebody who's never heard of CBLF or Church Building of Loan Fund, what is it that you hope people will know?
I guess I can answer that. Susan, you reminded me tomorrow is the actual date of my 8th anniversary at the fund. Church Building and Loan Fund, Chris, is the first church building society in the United States. Of course, it started as a congregationalist organization, American Congregational Union. And it is a mission-driven organization who started because the church wanted to extend the progressive Christian witness of the Congregationalists to the western frontier at that time, which was Ohio. And so it's important that we start there, because we emphasize so much in our work that before you can think about your building, you got to think about mission. And that has been the profile of Church Building and Loan Fund from the very beginning. The meeting that the fund was conceived at was a meeting about expanding the mission of the church. And this was actually almost an afterthought to that meeting. Well, if we're going to expand our mission, maybe we should build some churches, and that's kind of how it went, and we try to instill that in all that we do to this day.
If I could share, one of the things I would like everyone to know is that we, even though our name says Church Building and Loan Fund, we are much, much more than a funding agency. We do much, much more than loans. And if there's one little line I would say, we walk with you from the very beginning in terms of mission development all the way until your project is complete. So everything that's required from birth to adulthood, we provide.
And this is really like where I got invested and interested and really collaborative with CBLF in my work, is that because Faith Info holds church planting, it made so much sense for us to work together about how do we work together and support congregations at their initiation and beyond, and encourage that kind of work within the United Church of Christ and further. So I do want to name that with excitement for, I know CBLF is both a part of the national setting and is its own being, and our collaboration has been one of great joy for me going forward as well. So let me ask you this, and I'm putting you on the spot here. If you were to give when somebody comes to you saying, we're thinking about starting a church and we want to build a church building, what happens next?
So you got to make sure you ask which one of us you want to speak, but I'll tell you. So typically, and I love the way you put those two things together, because that's often what happens. Um, People say, I want to start a church, I need a building. And we would say to them, okay, well, we've been around 167 years, so that's a good thing, and we can help you, but you might want to back up a little bit and focus on that church you're starting. What's your mission? Where are you called to be a church? Why there? What is it that your ministry as a church is going to do? And see, at this point, the person is getting frustrated because we're not talking about walls and buildings and construction. We're talking about all that other stuff. And our point is, you really can't be effective in building, purchasing, or repurposing or rebuilding a property, a church property. You can't do well with that asset as far as what God wants you to do until you've answered all those other questions. Now, the other thing that people may not realize is we're really good at all that other stuff too. I mean, we know everything you need to know about a building. We know everything you need to know about raising money. We know everything you need to know about repurposing, everything you need to know about all of that stuff. But if you didn't need the first thing, you wouldn't be a church. So we focus on mission because that's where a good project begins.
And if I could add to that, we first explain our fourfold process, which is plan, raise, finance, and build. And the one thing I do want to emphasize is that we usually never say no, we just say not yet, and then we help you get there. And so we're willing to walk with you. I mean, we've walked with churches for 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4 years to get to
Or more.
or more to get to where they want to be. And as Patrick has so eloquently said, it's all about your why. Why are you here? Why are you in this particular place? And what has God called you to do right here?
Patrick, I've often heard you talk about when churches reach out for help, and I'm thinking now of established congregations, and they're reaching out to you or Cornerstone. I know you work very closely together for like particular help. And I've heard you say people reach out and you often wish that they'd reached out 5 years earlier. Can you speak to that?
Well, oftentimes that could be any number of reasons, right? So if it's for deferred maintenance issues, that could be it. Sometimes, a leak in the roof turns into a new roof because of more than 5 years of neglect. Or it could be that, they're all deep into the details of a project and are lost and need help. And so we tell church, especially new churches, and I think the distinction should be made. The reason why the UCC is blessed to have 2 organizations that serve building needs is because Church Building and Loan Fund was founded essentially to help churches get started. And that was the reason that in about 1989, more than 130 years or so after we were founded, the Church Building Loan Fund started the Cornerstone Fund to serve traditional churches. And even though our work is very similar now, the focus for Cornerstone is on older churches 30 years or older. And the focus for Church Building Loan Fund are churches younger than 30 years and churches that are not affiliated with the United Church of Christ. So we serve both UCC churches, newer UCC churches, and churches in the outside of the United Church of Christ. And then sometimes, as you pointed out, Chris. Sometimes we partner with Cornerstone on larger loan projects, and sometimes we partner with other denominational building funds on really large projects, so that we can do a project up to about $25 million in size, if need be, with our partners. Long answer to a short question.
It's all good. So, do you want to add anything into that? One of the things that I would also say is that your church building and loan fund, so often people come to you for building needs and don't see the missional component that you've so intentionally framed in this conversation. And I know that you're looking, particularly given 2020, when we've all left our buildings for a certain way, and then it's like, where do we go from here? One might say that you are building church differently. And I'm curious about what that means for you, what that looks like, and what it will look like.
I want Susan to answer that, because building church differently was birthed out of her mind.
Well, initially, we were looking to have an umbrella where all of our consulting services were placed under, whether it's mission and strategic planning and visioning, or capital campaigns, or stewardship campaigns, or repurposing, and our webinars and all those things. We're looking for an umbrella to put it under. But then COVID hit. And as I was trying to think of, what could we call this, COVID hit, and we had to start doing things differently. And so that led to the concept of building church differently, in ways that we were already uniquely doing things differently and trying to change people's understanding and concept of church, in terms of helping people live into God's economy. And explaining that whole concept and how that works and what we mean by that. And so we wanted the umbrella to hold all of that. And I personally believe that we will forever be building church differently from this point on. It will continue. I don't think there will be a new normal. We will continue to evolve, because I also believe that church is one of the last entities to really catch up to where society is in terms of doing things differently, in terms of technology, in terms of utilizing its land and resources in a different way. So we're hoping to change that mindset and that way of thinking is one of our goals for building church differently.
One of the things that I think has been a blessing of COVID, and not to dismiss the severity of the pandemic. I know people out there who've lost loved ones. Churches have struggled some, and people are predicting all kinds of doom for churches. I don't buy into that completely, although I know we know that churches will struggle. But the fact of the matter is, the churches that we work with, most of them have endured through the pandemic pretty much in terms of loans, taking care of their loan payments. A few have had to defer loan payments, and we've been working with them on that. But the thing that has happened, the blessing has been that for many churches, they realize that the building is not an idol, or to stop treating it like an idol, whereas we sometimes worship the stained glass windows, or the pews, or the color of the carpet, or whatever. We have sentiment attached to the building because, my parents, my grandparents, whoever, all kinds of stuff. And being away from the building has shaken that up. And I think that's something God had in mind to help us realize that we're the church, whether we have a building or we have a lean-to or we have to go online. And churches have shown resiliency and strength and ability to pivot quickly to online services, online giving. It's a fascinating thing. And I think we needed to learn that about ourselves. And then for us, it has meant that churches can look at their building for what they are: assets that we steward like we steward other assets that belong to God and need to be used for purposes that advance. The Bible calls it the kingdom of God. If we say if Jesus were here today, he would call it God's economy. So I think that's one of the things we've gotten. So we've been so busy this season through COVID with churches calling saying, what do we do with our building to really deploy it as an asset for our mission? And what do we do to repurpose to fit the needs in the community? And it's been a beautiful thing.
I know that that's been something you've been focusing on with deep intention. And I know that because we visited St. Peter's in Louisville, which has been a community that's really orienting themselves, their building, and how they are utilizing that building in conversation with God's economy and the community that they are in. So can I ask you to speak a little bit about that and center, lift up that mission, those ministries in ways that demonstrate what you've been able to do?
Love that. And another thing that St. Peter's has shown through their architect who attends a far more affluent UCC church is churches working together, because Hal Covert donated his services for several years before this project. But St. Peter's is located in one of the poorest neighborhoods probably in the country, 5 minutes from downtown Louisville, in the heart of where people are protesting right now around the Breonna Taylor injustice. But we have a wonderful UCC church there, St. Peter's UCC, Pastor James Etta Ferguson, who's been there going on about 10 years now. And her church started out almost with no members. She was called there by the remnants of the German congregation that was there to grow the church. They've grown it to maybe 200 members, but more importantly, through her Molo Village Community Development Corporation, they serve 1,000 people a week in feeding programs, AA programs, self-help programs, credit repair, you name it, they do it. And because of her calling us and actually being denied, we denied a loan for her because she wanted a $10 million loan to repair an old building. She wanted $1 million loan for a building that needed $10 million in repairs, and she had less than 100 members and a tiny budget. We couldn't, I called her personally, said, there's no way we're going to do this. And then we looked at her property and saw that she has a city block. And so we started working with her. Fast forward 5 years now almost, and they are in the last months of constructing a mixed use commercial and retail facility on their church property, on one of the corners of that church property, where they've secured a credit union as a tenant because that community is underbanked. The first coffee shop in that community in 50 years. It's going to employ something like 100 people in construction and then permanent jobs after that in the dozens. And it's an investment in the poorest community certainly in Louisville, one of the poorest neighborhoods in the country. And that's the kind of way that investing in a project, it's about an $8 million project. We invested with Cornerstone as well as the Disciples of Christ and Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. That's the kind of project that we use the leverage of our resources to secure other resources to bring really justice in terms of economic justice to a community and serve in a way that advances the mission of the gospel. That's a win-win for us. That's what we want to do in every project, even if it's not as complicated. That's a complicated project. It's about, I think it was 7 sources of funding, including New Markets tax credits, including philanthropic gifts, somewhere around $3 million in philanthropic gifts. I mean, it was a big project for us, but it was one of the more impactful, and we're very proud of it.
That, I mean, I love hearing about that and witnessing it and seeing it in motion from the incredible leadership of the pastor and lay leaders of the community, as well as the ongoing commitment that CBLF has made in conversation with preparation to help it excel. So
One more thing I wanted to say about that, and I want to also credit Susan. We did something, in my opinion, was the first time we ever done it, and I think it's key to what got us through many, many days of disappointment, which we have to write a book on it. We had a ground blessing for that project about a year, maybe 2 years before we broke ground, where we had John, our general minister president, and Tracy Blackman, our associate general minister and president at the time, came along with myself and others. We literally prayed and God's blessings upon the ground. It wasn't a public event, no publicity. It was just the church and us. And I know for a fact, every time we hit a disappointment, I remembered the ground blessing, and that got us through.
God knows our faith is going to carry us through so much, especially as we have been demonstrating that throughout the course of these past several months, where sometimes I feel like all I'm hanging on to is faith when everything else is a little bit wonky. There are so many things that are destabilized as a result of COVID-19 and as a result of the continued uprisings and clarion calls for justice across multiple aspects of this work. And I know that one of those things that has become unsettled is congregations that realize that their mission and their building are not aligned. Congregations that realize that the amount of effort and energy they're putting into their building has really become their mission. I'm wondering, Susan, if you can speak to that scenario and the opportunities and the resources that CBLF has to support congregations making those hard decisions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. That's a good area. I want to first say that, not only are we encouraging others to build church differently, we are building ourselves differently as we have moved mostly all of our programming to online services so that we can continue to work with churches across the country. But in that, we do know that some churches will not make it through COVID, just as, it takes effect in all areas and all communities and everywhere. And so we do have a program that addresses legacy and closure. And just because a church closes doesn't mean that it doesn't still have impact in that community where it resides. The legacy could be that you do some affordable housing or some senior living, or you utilize and repurpose the land and the buildings for something else. Right now, one of the things that's happening across the country is that a lot of congregations are providing extra space for schools because the schools itself can't social distance. And so they need that extra space for extra activities that are happening in schools. And so, but we have a service that's led by the Reverend Dr. Davies, who will walk with you through that process. It's a very pastoral care centered process and help you to vision and plan and imagine what's possible. Without feeling the dread of, oh, our building is gone, or our space is closed, or we won't be able to service people. We help you to leave that living legacy, even if the church closes. And maybe sometimes the church can still be a small part of that legacy. And so we're working with you through that. And we're hoping that more people will come and ask us questions about that. One other thing I wanted to address too, while we're on this building church differently subject, is that prior to COVID-19, I was in the process of thinking about how church is changing and how so many congregations are moving to online worship services. And we know that many of them will not go back to the church, and some of them will remain split. So you'll have congregants that are online, and you have congregants that come to the building. And how do we work with that? And then how do we work with those who are completely online? So I want people to know that we're brainstorming about that in ways that we can help, and we're thinking about that. The only thing that happened was COVID just interrupted us, but we're on track so that you know that you won't be left out.
I love that you're bringing that in, because the innovation of ministry is a question that we are consistently in conversation with on faith education, innovation, and formation as well. How is it that we are equipping, you like that little plug in there? How is it that we are continuing to think about how to equip existing congregations, identify emerging congregations, and support the folk who are present in the midst of all sorts of struggle, and opportunity in such a way that we are continuing to lift up the liberating love of the gospel. So, you know, in thinking that through, I want to bring in a question that came up in the Q&A, thinking about, it's got a couple of underlying assumptions in the question. So I'll read the whole thing out and then allow you to kind of pull out the pieces that will engage conversation. So from Ron, do we need different meeting venues and methods of sermon delivery? Maybe timeshare churches? 90% of people believe in a higher power, says Ron, and only 20% go to brick and mortar churches. We are losing the next generations. I will name the statistics there. I've seen all over the place. So I pass to the two of you in terms of different methods of sermon delivery and or gospel.
Yes, we are moving to different methods of sermon delivery. I think a whole bunch of churches have experienced that going online. I'm currently bivocational, have been for many years, and I have to do both now. And it is different when you are on air as opposed to in person. And yes, there's different modalities of ministry. But I do wonder, and I'm being a little bit facetious when I say this, why is it that the secular folks in the real estate world value churches more than church folks do? You know, it seems to me that we have this idea that the building is bad, or that we don't need buildings. And that's interesting to me because, you know, I'm in New York and there's certain parts of the year that if I'm want to worship, I can't do it outdoors. I mean, you know, maybe for 30 seconds or, you know, maybe after I shovel the snow, or there's some parts of the country where it's, you know, 150 degrees outside. You want some air conditioning. Most people need a place to worship at some point. And the idea of churches owning the building is an idea that, listen, you want a space that you can control at some point, especially in these days and times. But it is true that many churches are building rich and everything else poor. So what do we do about that, right? Why are churches clinging to buildings when they don't need a building, maybe the building that they're in? And how do we change that? But it's not about forgetting about buildings. First of all, they don't belong to us. They're God's assets. And if God has tens of thousands of properties in the planet and we think that means nothing, I think we ought to think about what do we think about the statement that says the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and all that is therein. I think God is concerned about the fact that there's properties controlled by religious folks and that those properties should be advancing the mission of the church. I think sometimes we're not up to that in our thinking and our theology, and I think that's part of what we do. We want to change that. We want to see us in the right kind of property at the right time, in the right price. We don't believe on if you build it, they will come. That's crazy. Don't do that. You don't just build a church anywhere. You're building it in a place for a certain purpose. And those are the kinds of things that we think about today. I know it's probably shaking up some thinking out there, but that's the idea.
If I could just add one thing, one of the concepts that I like to use is that the building or the physical locale is the launching pad of the ministry. It is not the ministry. Is if you're going to work with technology and you're trying to help students with computers, then you need a place to launch for. If you're trying to feed a neighborhood, you're certainly going to need a commercial kitchen to do all those kinds of things in. So what we used to do is just build this building according to the way that those inside the building wanted it, versus utilizing the building for the needs of those outside of it in the community. And so understanding why we are in a particular locale and looking at what the community needs are, that's how you design your building. And some people are renting their space and sharing their space and to other organizations. It's not just about the the church. It's about other organizations with like-minded missions and visions and
key
goals that they want to meet. So it's about meeting the needs of the entire community and not just our own.
I love that. And that's the key. I've heard, you know, sometimes people, I have heard congregations speak to their building as a revenue source without the piece of not, it has to be a revenue source that is aligned with the mission. Because if we are saying our theology says X, Y, and Z, and then we're having someone renting out from the building wherein their practices determine that they are doing something that is not in alignment with our theology, our mission, our call, our God-given way of being in this world, the dissonance is one that, you know, as so many people are able to hold cognitive dissonance, I don't believe that God wants us to be in cognitive dissonance with our surroundings and with our communities. What I want to bring in a ripple into this conversation, and this is coming from my work working with people who are doing new church planting and some of the commentary that I'm watching around us, and that is, I am seeing a resurgence of an insurgence. I'm seeing a lot of new church gatherings, communities that are coming together digitally, where their mission is to reach into the deep, dark corners of the internet and be a theologically progressive presence for people who have been told in every other aspect of their life that they are not welcome. And usually this is centered in queer community, it's centered in disability community. The people who are showing up in these digital spaces don't have access to life-saving theology in other places often. So in thinking about the work that you do beyond buildings and building church differently, what comes to mind when I mention this as a case study? What about churches without those walls and who don't have those buildings?
I think it's a great thing. I think it's just one way of innovation. You know, the UCC launched a virtual church, 6-7 years ago, and I think it's this COVID season that's really made live streaming more mainstream for churches. And I love the fact that God basically said, okay, it's time for me to take over the internet. And all of a sudden, because of the pandemic, you can go to church almost every day online. So I applaud those efforts. And I think as those churches grow, some of them will never use a building. That's great. I mean, you know, you don't need our services. You might want to probably use our capital campaign services to raise money. You might want to use our strategic planning services to plan your strategy. You may want to, use our services to flesh out your mission and vision for who you are and what you want to be. So there are ways that we can help that may not require anything to do with a space. But you know, I don't foresee a time when churches won't need property ever need any property. And I think in the time we're in now, churches own a lot of property. And so the question is, how do we serve for building funds, church owned fund like ours? The question is, what's the best way to serve the needs of churches with properties or who are seeking properties? And this is what we do. But we also, because we have a responsibility to advance the mission of the church, we also build the field. So that's why we launched with you, Chris Davies, and Faith Info, Odesse Fellows, right? Where we are nurturing and equipping innovative church leaders. Very few of those will wind up in church building loans. We know that, but we think it's the responsibility of our organization to build the field of leaders. We offer capacity building services for leadership that have nothing to do with how you actually do a church, but it has to do with how you organize, how you plan, how you raise money. Those are things that are always going to be necessary, and you come to us for that, and we'll be glad to help.
Yes, I would just add to that. That's well said, Patrick. What we have realized is that, yes, there will be churches who will be strictly online. And in that, we also realize that there will be churches who have physical buildings but operate virtually. And one of the things strategically we're looking at is how do you pastor to folk you never see, or folk who never come, or folk who don't live in your region. The other thing that we're also seeing is that there are, beyond the context which you mentioned, Chris, there are many, many, many women who are swarming the internet and having virtual churches and doing their thing. And so we're looking at, I'm engaged in conversation with all of the components and everything that's brewing up new to be strategic about how we can help them and what we can do for them. Stay tuned. We do have some things coming. One of the new things that is in the planning stages is our new program called Transform Church, Transform Communities. So we are in that mindset of everything's going to be transformed and transforming. And so we're looking at all the new ways, what's happening during this pandemic and what we might think will be the context following the pandemic. So we got you in mind.
You know, I was just thinking that, you know, one of the uses that, you know, a real use today that we can help churches in terms of financing or raising money for is your video equipment. Or maybe you want to build a studio, or you have space to build a studio in your church for podcasts or video or other things. We can help you with that, raise money for it or finance it. And it can also become a revenue generating space for you. You can, you know, because people need studio space. You might restrict it to certain kinds of music or certain kinds of uses according to your local ministry, your mission. But that's something that a lot of churches are looking at right now. You know, we can help you with that. We can do a small loan or for that, or help you raise the money. Usually, you can probably get into a starter video equipment for under $10,000. We can help you raise that. So there's some immediate needs that I think we can help churches with that are innovative, but not, it doesn't have to be so far outside of the box that it's hard to do. And I just thought I'd throw that in.
I love that. And, you know, we say that everything includes tangible places of connection and what churches can do. And so much of what you've been saying has really uplifted things that I hope that those of you watching with us now or in the recording are finding ideas about what conversations your congregation can have. And how you want to align what you have, what God has you know, held for you, and you are holding an escrow for God, with your mission and with the way in which you are called to be church in this world, in your community. So those two things are essential. I want to shift our conversation a little bit and talk some about metrics. So, you know, through the work that we've done together, and I will say that we work pretty closely together. You know, a lot of what I do is receive questions from congregations. And for many of those questions, I do a lot of referring to the fine folks at CB&LF and the work that I know that you excel at. But I also know that we've talked a lot about the metrics of how are people in relationship with their community. And Patrick, you have spoken pretty extensively about this, and I want to invite you to bring that into the conversation and offer some questions and metrics that people might measure against, or questions they might have in figuring out their own.
Sure. So Church Building Loan Fund is a mission-driven organization. We're a nonprofit religious corporation, and UCC, every congregation is a mission-driven organization. It means that you exist. We exist to advance a mission. All nonprofits, you know, religious or not. And so one of the things that has arisen within this sector, the nonprofit sector, and not as fast in the religious sector, but I think we're on the leading edge of that, is if you're a mission-driven organization, how do you show that you're accomplishing that mission? You know, typically the way we talk about our church is we have so many members, we have this many ministries, we fed this many people, we used to count conversions back in the day. All all of these are really outputs, things you can count, things you can point to and say, this is how many we did. But none of that speaks to how you created transformation in the world. And if it does speak to it, like for example, we fed some poor people, or we gave away, Sunday at our church, we gave away 75 portions of groceries to poor families, right? That free. And people came, we got it. And so we felt good about it. But how do you measure transformation? How do you know that but for those 75 bags, those 75 people may not have eaten, or you affected them, their lives positively? And that's what we're talking about when we talk about impact. So we've taken on a task of developing what our consultants are telling us, because they can't find comparable organizations. We're probably one of the first, if not the first, religious organization to do an impact report to show how we are making a difference in the world based on data, where they've mined all of our data, everything we do. And these are data scientists, and it's fascinating to me. They get giddy over data, like, little points of measurement and comparisons of those. And they're going to help us to articulate how we have made an impact through evidence, not just, oh, we helped a lot of people, but we helped X number of people in this way, and that caused a transformation in the world, which you can define as this. And so our point of doing that is, especially now when resources are becoming dear for nonprofit organizations, for churches, people respond and give to organizations that can demonstrate that they're effective, that they're making an impact. So now more than ever, it's critical for the church to demonstrate its impact through metrics. And so as we roll ours out, our next step is going to be helping to create a template for churches to do this, individual congregations to do the same thing. Imagine if all 5,000 UCC churches could show through data how we made a difference in the world. That's a powerful thing, and it's a powerful statement to potential donors and those who support the mission of your organization. So we're excited about it. We're working with a group called Sorensen Impact Center in Salt Lake City, Utah, and they've done this for many organizations, including the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So when I heard about that, I said, oh, we're going to have a similar impact report to one of the largest foundations on the planet. Yeah, that group. So, and we're bringing that to the UCC and to the church world, and we're looking forward to spreading that message and getting others to do the same.
That kind of impact conversation makes me giddy. I always think about, like, where I am situated, I probably have 40 or 50 more years of ministry in front of me. And things that concern me are, how are we collectively thinking about the impact we have in our communities? How does this system play out, and who is harmed? How is the earth harmed? How are people who are in or below the poverty line, or in or below the actual line of income? Our system is set up so that people must be living in debt, in order for this to continue going. And I know that this kind of global conversation about sustainability is pretty wide, and that you are in conversation with that. So I'd love to bring in the conversation, the sustainability goals of the UN. Yes,
what we're doing, and I found this, in fact, after hearing about this SDGs, I think probably many of the folks listening know about the Sustainable Development Goals that came after the Millennium Goals that the United Nations developed. But what I've learned in this journey for impact measurement for Church Building and Loan Fund is that the SDGs in other parts of the world are much more highly known and used as a measure of impact. or as a standard or a way to align with others around the world. There's 17 goals and it's Sustainable Development Goals. The first one is, when I read it, it gave me chills. The first goal was end poverty in all forms everywhere. And I read it and I go, and then there's 16 more after that? And not only do they have the goals, but the goals behind each goal is a set of standards, language to help you say how will you do that. And the UN actually did an analysis and came up with a dollar figure of what it would cost to accomplish those goals over the 15 years. And it was in the trillions of dollars. Important thing is, if a bunch of people around the world are saying, I'm going to align, I'm going to go after, I'm seeing them scroll across the screen, peace, justice, and strong institutions. I'm going to make that a goal I want to pursue. You look at the SDG and read about it and see where that aligns with work you're doing. It's usually the other way around. You figure out what you're doing and see how that aligns with the goals is how you would do it. And that's what we're doing. And so far, what we're discovering is that we're at least 5 or 6 of them are going to be things that we are able to match our work against. And what that says is that you're in a global conversation with nonprofits, for-profits, hybrid organizations around the world about working together. It's kind of like, I think about it as like the lectionary. We all read, when we use the lectionary, thousands and thousands of churches are reading the same scripture, praising God in the same way. That's sort of the SDGs. It's kind of like the lectionary for transformation. And so if all of us are kind of on that page, using the 2, 3, or 1, or whatever goals that you want to advance or think your organization is advancing, then you can really point to how that change is happening through your organization, your church. So this is what you're going to, when you see our impact report early next year, you'll see what our impact has been and how we've advanced several of those 17 SDGs.
Thank you so much. I know that, so those of you who are watching the recording, I want to let you know that the resources that we've mentioned throughout this conversation are available beneath the YouTube video in what's showing up below. All the websites, the goals, and everything to look at and be in conversation with, you'll have access to. This is being recorded. It will be up on YouTube after the fact. So I want to kind of offer a final question for each of you, Susan first, which is, what is it that you hope people watching will hear and know about CBLF going forward?
I hope people will hear that there is a resource, an entity, Church Building and Loan Fund, who is here. And actually it is your Church Building and Loan Fund, and we are here to assist you. All you need to do is just contact us via email or a website or a phone call, and we will begin the process. If it's nothing but having conversations to help you walk through a process or understand where you are, we are here to help. That's the biggest thing. We want our congregations to be sustainable. And that's different for every congregation, how that plays out. And so we're here to help you be sustainable and to usher in your ministry to which God has called you to. And so we're here to help.
And we, as I think, as Susan said, we can help you whether you have a building or not. And we want to make sure that's clear to everyone through our various services in capacity building, fundraising, stewardship, capital campaigns, stewardship, and the other consulting services. But if you have a building, and especially if you have a building and it's not used in the way that you think is the maximum use that it could be put to, call us. If you are not sure about how to align the use of your assets with mission and how to be impactful in that, call us. A conversation, as Susan said, costs you nothing. Initial conversation with us costs you nothing. An inquiry by email or chat costs you nothing. It's going to cost you something eventually, but it doesn't cost to ask. And the good news is we can help with the financing you need, whether it's raising the money you need, or if you need to a loan, a building loan, we can help you with that. But listen, if you just have a question, just call, answer, email. We'll be glad to help.
Thank you. Beloveds of God, it has been a joy to be in conversation with both of you and with all of you who are asking so many questions. I know that this is going to be an ongoing conversation for many of you. And if this conversation has been one that mattered to you, if this is the kind of work that you know you need and your church needs, and if this is a way that has moved your spirit and your soul towards hope about what you and your church can do, please consider donating into the annual fund of the United Church of Christ, which supports conversations like this. You can do so by texting UCC to 41444, and that will go into our collective work, which supports not only this conversation, but all of what we do in service to local churches and beyond. Additionally, as you think about preparing for stewardship campaigns this fall, I want to offer to you to consider using the Beloved Love materials from the United Church of Christ. These materials draw on the language of the three great loves, and they are rooted in the values of the United Church of Christ, and help. There will also be a resources document to help leaders implement the campaign in their congregations. So you can tell the story of the impact that you have in your ministry and in your community via these campaigns and so many other resources available for you. Finally, I do want to let you know that this weekend is World Communion Sunday. On Thursday, our webinar together will be with all the global partners, will be with the global ministries of the United Church of Christ and our area executives, and we're going to pray together. We're going to take communion together, and we're going to be in worship together with awareness of the whole of this world and all that we are holding collectively right now. And we're designing that webinar, local pastors, for you to also use that on Sunday as your worship if you'd like to. So note that that is what is coming. So having said the call to offering and the announcements I have for you, I also want you to know that if you want more information, CBLF, the fine folks at CBLF have been incredible to continue to work with, and they are responsive and engaging. So if you've had questions that we didn't answer in the course of this conversation, you can reach out directly to them, and they'll be there. So I'm really honored and proud to continue to work together for local churches and beyond in this world, so that we can bring about God's economy, a just world for all, and the liberating gospel for all people. Having said that, Reverend Dr. Duggan, will you do us the honor of praying us into the rest of our day?
Certainly, Reverend Dr. Chris Davies, and thank you for having us on this great program. We appreciate the opportunity and the chance to share with churches. We love the church, we love churches, and we love working with churches. So it's a joy to be here. May we pray. Gracious and almighty God, from whom all blessings flow, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the opportunity to fellowship with co-laborers in the gospel, leaders and members of churches, mostly UCC churches, I would imagine, from all over the country. Oh God, you have called us into a wonderful opportunity to be your representatives, your avatars here on earth, to live out your gospel, to love one another, to be the church, to hold forth in all the ways that you call us to be people of love and justice, to be people of generosity and welcome. God, we are so blessed to be trusted with that ministry. And at the same time, oh God, you have kept us in this difficult season, this pandemic or multiple pandemics of disease and injustice and economic recession. God, we know that you have equipped us with everything we need. And so even as we feel burdened by some of the things going on in the world, by the change in our lives due to COVID-19 and so many other things, we know that you are still with us, guiding us and keeping us and directing our paths. So God, we thank you today. We glorify your name. And oh God, we ask your manifold blessings upon all of the churches, the congregations represented here today, because they give hope and light and love to people in need. And as we seek to do better in ministry, to be more effective, to be more impactful, to reach people with using technology, to use our resources wisely, and to be a blessing in the lives of people who are different from us, who look different, who worship differently, and who just don't know anything about our culture, but we seek God to just be a blessing. So we know that you hear our prayers. We thank you for hearing our prayers, and we glorify your name, for it is in the name of Jesus that we pray. Let every heart say amen.